So it got down to 0 degrees last night. And this is the situation in the garden this morning. As you can see, I have covered both of my front garden beds where the majority of the tomatoes were with 6mm plastic. Covered some other things as well. Some of my dry beans had not yet quite matured. These are covered with a fleece. It's just sort of a fabric that you use. I've got some thinner plastic on my peppers. And on my tomatoes in the back garden, there's some more plastic. And some fleece on some cucumbers. This is a tomato I did not cover. And it's actually looking okay. Probably protected by the foliage around it. Can sort of help to trap heat in these lower levels if there's lots of tall stuff growing right around it. So if you've got trees, that'll help you be protected from frost. This one had a little bit less protection, and it's looking, there's a little bit of leaf curl happening, there's some browning on the leaves happening, and through the course of the day as it warms up they might sort of wilt and die back. And that's your signal that it did get some frost damage. A lot of these vegetables don't need frost covers because they can actually handle a frost. That goes for most things that grow in the ground. The foliage might be affected, but the plants, the thing that you harvest, the roots, i.e. potatoes, carrots, beets, stuff like that, will be fine. Onions are also very tolerant of frost. Alright, so let's have a look under this cover. See what the peppers look like. Well, they are okay. They are definitely not enjoying the cool weather, but the leaves still feel fairly firm, bendy but not wilted. That one I think got a little bit of frost damage. You can see it's sort of a darker color, and as the weather warms after a frost, you'll tend to see the results a little more clearly. These are definitely cool weather stressed, but they're not too badly frost damaged. So this cover did do its job. Peek under here. You can see there's some frost damage, some darkening and discoloring of the leaves. So there's a little bit of frost damage on the tips, but the rest of the plant, the lower foliage that isn't touching the fleece, and the beans are themselves fine. Here are my tomatoes in the back. You can see I've just sort of wrapped them up like little mummies. I haven't covered everything that's sensitive. It's always a bit of a trade-off between how much you can cover, how much is worth saving, how close are those things to maturity. If something is very far from maturity and it's looking like the frost is going to be a continuous thing, you're probably not going to get much more out of it, even if you do cover. So this is fleece. Under this particular piece of fleece we have some beans, green beans, and some cucumbers all along here. And then right in this corner, taking up a huge amount of space, is a ground cherry. Now it has lots of fruit on it, but it hasn't matured any yet, so I've been hoping that with a little warmer temperatures, that like the tomatoes, they will ripen off faster with a little bit of cover to keep them warmer during the day. Here in the pumpkin patch, you can see we've employed both a heavy plastic and a fleece. This is an egg 19 fleece. It's supposed to protect up to -4 degrees. This one we've had for a couple of years, and it's starting to get quite thin and develop a few holes. It's quite brittle at this stage, but I think it might have another year left in it, hopefully. You can see we didn't cover everything. Here's a row of pumpkins that was exposed. You can see a lot of the tops of the leaves are drooping really heavily. That's your sign that there's frost damage on those leaves, but if you look below them, the leaves that have been covered by other leaves are generally looking okay. So definitely some damage. If the temperature warms up sufficiently, those plants that have 2/3 of their leaves left can still produce more or mature their pumpkins more, but it'll be dependent on the weather. These ones under the fleece have a little bit more heat trapped under them during the day, and so that should hopefully accelerate growth. You can see more of this damage a little closer up. This time of year is always a bit devastating, especially if your fruit set has not lived up to your hopes. It's part of the cost of living in a short season area. One thing to note is that pumpkins, if they are growing on the edges of the plant where they are not covered by leaves at night, can suffer frost damage to the fruits themselves, which will cause soft spots and rotting in the future. There's a pumpkin in here somewhere. Let me just find it with my camera. Oh, he's too far away. What I did do with some of these vines, these small immature fruits weren't going to do much anyway, was pull them back over top in order to cover the fruit that would otherwise have been exposed, hopefully protecting it from the cold temperatures. Zucchini, there's a little bit of damage to it, but it's looking actually like it's doing okay. So we might get a few zooks off this left yet. Here I've just pulled back this plastic so you can see the difference. That is the section that was covered. You can see there is some mottling and discoloring on the leaves that were pressed against the plastic. But underneath they look alright, and the majority of that leaf itself isn't necessarily destroyed. You can see here, roughly here is the line the plastic was covering. The leaves on this side are just much wiltier. So what frost actually does is it causes the water inside of the plant cells to expand, and then once the air thaws, or once the air is warm enough to thaw the plants, the cell walls of the plant were destroyed by that expansion of water into ice, and you can only tell that it happened after the thaw occurs. While they're still frozen, they might look fine, but then if you wait till it warms up, you'll see them start to wilt. Here, with this row cover, I am covering with plastic, and I am just pinning that down. Pinning that down there in the corner. You might be able to see that. There's an earth staple. Looks like that. And I just tend to squeeze them together so they go in the ground straight. And then you can step them in with your foot. I'm not sure if I showed you the sunflower patch in my last garden tour. There it is in all of its weedy glory. Most of this was seeded with birdseed. Just a big bag of black sunflower seeds for birdseed. I got a big, I don't know, 5-pound bag or 5-kilogram bag for about $6. Seeded all this and I still have tons left for using as birdseed later in the year. And then I've got some colorful varieties up the front. And a few other things growing in here, just annual flowers. As you can see, the sunflowers are not terribly affected by a frost. They can handle fairly light frosts. If it gets below -4, that's when they'll start showing signs of stress. So we did have to take in some of the pumpkins last night that were too exposed, that would have gotten frost damage. This is what we've got so far. So it got down to 0 last night. This is my weather station, which was a Christmas gift, which I have very, very much appreciated. And then on the top, you see this little guy. And that's just a cheap, like, $15 weather station. Doesn't really quite count. It's a temperature reading thing. Anyways, so this is reading the outdoor temperature. The end of this guy is actually underneath one of the covers in the tomatoes in those front garden beds I showed you earlier. So you can see that the covers have warmed up significantly over the day. It shows right now, it shows a low of 11. Of course, it got colder than that overnight. It just reset some time ago. Unfortunately, I'll fix that so that I can see how cold it gets under the cover overnight. Here's a shot of the garden through the window and my ever faithful garden watchdog. Hey, Gunner. Good boy. He's checking for cats. Alright, just to recap about frost. Frost occurs at or below 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Basically, it's caused by water in the cell structure of the plant expanding rapidly as it's freezing and breaking the cell walls. You can prevent this using a number of different types of frost coverings. You can employ plastic, you can employ fleeces, which is just a fabric version of a row cover. You can erect cloches made of glass or other more durable materials. If none of these options is viable for you, either because of the expense or the time, one of the things you can do is to, before a bad frost, mist all the plants in the garden, or the ones that you're concerned will freeze. Basically, you're just trying to create a layer of moisture on the outside of the plant leaf, which will absorb most of that freezing and hopefully prevent the plant itself from freezing. It sounds a little bit mythical, but it does work. It's also good to repeat that again in the morning before the temperature rises and the plants thaw out. I found a list of vegetables that will not survive frost. Basil, beans, corn, cucumbers, edamame, eggplant, melons, okra, peppers, potatoes, more specifically talking about the foliage, pumpkins, again, foliage, rosemary, summer squash, sweet potatoes, tomatillos, tomatoes, and winter squash. Now, in some of these cases, like the potatoes and the pumpkins, if the plants are exposed to a light frost, the plants will die back, but the potatoes will still be okay underneath the soil. The soil will have kept them warmer than the ambient temperature outdoors. With the pumpkins, as I've mentioned before, the fruit can be damaged by a harder frost, or if they were completely exposed, had no leaf cover during the frost. It is, of course, up to you what you do about the frost in your area. If you, like me, are in a short season area and it's an early frost, this year our frost will have been on the 30th of August. That's not too bad. Last year we actually had a frost, I think it was August 17th. I'll have to check my book, but I'm pretty sure that's what it said. Which was kind of devastating because that's a potential whole month of growth lost. That frost wasn't too bad for us last year, but this frost this year has definitely done some damage to our plants, and a lot of those plants are not going to be able to produce much more. If the weather turns around and we get 2 more weeks of warmer, drier weather, there is still a good chance that the things that I protected from the frost will be able to grow bigger and mature. And so for me, it's worth it to do it, to cover, and to do it the way that I've done it. I have had to make some sacrifices because covering everything just isn't an option for me. But especially if you live in a area with a small garden, it's a lot easier to manage. The other thing to note is that if you're living in an urban area, your temperatures are less likely to be as extremely low at night. The heat coming off of the houses and the pavement, especially how much sun heat the pavement absorbs, helps to keep those really cold nights from getting quite so low in a town or city setting. Those are things to keep in mind if your garden is very exposed. Mine is basically in an open area right next to a big field, and there's a huge gap between my house and the neighbor's house where the northwest wind can blow through and bring in all that cold air. So that makes my garden particularly frost susceptible. Hopefully in the next couple of years my trees will grow up a little bit more and they will begin to create a bit of a microclimate, protecting my plants from wind and some of those colder temperatures at night. These are all things to keep in mind, and I hope I covered everything. Let me know if there's anything else that you're curious about. Ask questions down in the comments below. Please like, subscribe if you think this kind of content is useful to you. And if you are subscribed, check the notification bell if you want to be sure to see my videos. This channel is so small that even if it's in your subscription, if you're not checking your subscriptions regularly, you'll probably miss a video because the YouTube algorithm doesn't throw me up there right away unless you're subscribed and the notifications are on. Just a thought. Anyways, hope you have a wonderful day. We'll see ya.